capital.
Can I just hand over the chair now to Teresa, who's been busy all day with SOC.
We had a very peaceful and uneventful session downstairs.
The women's movement often says that women have to work twice as hard to get to the top, and in Teresa's case, that's definitely been true.
I think one thing I want to say, I was in such a rush coming up that I've actually come without my phone, so I can't keep an eye on the time. So can I ask for a volunteer over here who's maybe got a watch on to indicate to me when we have about 10 minutes left? So I'm aware of that. Or Jane, if you can do. With no further ado, I think I will hand over to Derek Ward, who needs no introduction, especially that waistcoat that he made.
Don't mention Rupert Reed. I mean, very, very difficult to follow Jonathan, who I think is a superb example of the kind of things that we want to talk about, which is anti-capitalist economics, but where you get elected and make change. So a difficult act to follow, but I will talk at length and you'll have to stop me. Briefly, if you say that you're critical of capitalism and markets and so on, it's a bit like you're saying you've got two heads. That is seen as something which is a little bit crazy, and that we have a whole society which is based around markets and supposed efficiency and capitalism, and it's like a kind of secular religion, isn't it? So that if you get more economic growth, more profits, more jobs, that is the whole aim of politics and society. And we all know from things like the Olympics that the Olympics isn't about sport, it's about selling Coca-Cola and McDonald's. And sport isn't even about sport, it's about insane competition, and you have this idea of markets, competition, growth, profits, and if you say anything else, this is viewed as a kind of madness. Unfortunately, this is an economic system which contradicts the basic life support systems of this planet. And if you look at green politics, this is something which is very radical to say, something which is difficult to say. We live in a country which in many ways is very, very conservative, right from 1066. But, I've got a basic bias. I'm a parent, I want my kids to have a future, and I know that we have an economic system which is less an economic system, but a system of cancer. That what we have with this economic system is companies compete, they've got to make profit, they've got to reinvest that to survive, so they have to sell us essentially more and more crap. And we have to work harder and harder, and we have to waste more and more. And this is something which is essentially irrational and threatening the basic life support systems of this planet. So, if you look at CO2, you've got all this economic growth and waste and accumulation, and that after just 50, 60 years of high growth industrialisation in a small part of the planet is threatening our very survival. And something I constantly talk about, which isn't talked about very much, is the fact that we're producing so much CO2 that not only is it disrupting the climate, but it's acidifying the oceans. And the fact we're even debating the fact that within 40, 50 years, oceans will shift from being slightly alkaline to slightly acid. That will then destroy shellfish and wreck the basis of marine ecosystems is insanity. We're in the madhouse. 99% of politics, media, culture, so on, is a drive towards the cliff. Karl Marx somewhere wrongly said that revolution is the locomotive of history. Walter Benjamin rightly said that what revolution is about is taking the brakes on the train, stopping the train before it leaps the rails. And we're in this unfortunate situation that the prevailing common sense, the prevailing social system, political system, economic system is a gun at all of our heads, and we have to remove that, and that is extremely challenging. But if you don't focus on that, we're not serious. I'm a self-interested person, I'm not a moral person. I want to survive, I want my kids to survive, and I see a whole system that threatens that. And you look at things like climate change, and we've got a global system to deal with it, and basically it's about banks, isn't it? That we have a whole global agreement that hasn't quite worked. Even if it works, it's about carbon trading, so banks can buy and sell, the right to buy and sell, the right to produce carbon. And like a lot of things, it sort of looks reasonable that if you limit the amount of carbon and sell off batches of carbon, that works. but of course there's massive cheating, hedging of carbon funds. You know, another example that Jonathan talked about very eloquently is biofuels. That the whole thing is we've got to keep cars on the road, we've got to keep economic accumulation going. So what we're going to do is take biofuels, and Greens have bought into this. You know, we've been conned and we've done evil, a lot of Greens. You know, so you have the main source of biofuels from Europe. European Union has agreed that 5% of vehicle fuel has got to be biofuels. The main source, as we know, is Colombia. So you have Afro-Caribbean people, indigenous people, campesinos living on the land in Colombia. Ecologically, their land is taken, they're threatened by right-wing death squads and people who talk about ecology and immigration, I think, in my view, are beneath contempt because some of these people end up here. So their land is stolen by right-wing death squads to grow palm oil for biofuels. So I could rail against capitalism for the next 6 hours, but what I briefly want to do is talk about how we bring political change. And I think one of the things to be aware of is that if you look at markets and capitalism, that's just one way of running the economy. There are other ways of running the economy, and it is possible to have prosperity without growth. You know, it's not utopia, we can't solve all human problems, but if we have a basic attitude that the economic system is here to serve human beings and the rest of nature, rather than we're here to serve capitalism, that's a start. Traditionally, what we viewed in economics is you have markets, you have states. What visionaries like Karl Marx, I'm sorry my beard isn't as good as his, he's greener than me, and Ellen Rostrom. Do we know about Ellen Rostrom? Yeah. Hands up, who knows about Ellen Rostrom? Yeah. Right, that's one. So Ellen Rostrom, 2, 3, 5. So basically what Marx and Ostrom say is that you can have forms of collective property within ecological restraints. So what you can do is you can manage property not just through a market system, not just through top-down government, but through collective provision within ecological rules. So if you look at the kind of growth of things like Wikipedia, social sharing, the way the net works, if you look at how indigenous people look after land, there's ways in which that people can have access to property, common pool property, and the condition for this is you don't disrupt the property. Now, if that sounds like fairly wacky and out there, I'll probably need hours to explain it, but like a kind of basic idea, Ostrom went out of a way to look at what was the notion of the tragedy of the commons, which is the idea if you have common land, people disrupt it. The great thing about Ostrom that I say as a Marxist is Ostrom comes from like Hayekian, free market, libertarian, complete opposite point of view. But the great thing about Ostrom is she's a very, very stubborn woman. So she went out and studied the tragedy of commons and actually found round the world quite often you've got people with common land, common resources, and they can work out ways of managing them. And she, in the ultimate heresy to the free market, said, well, in fact, people know that if they don't look after their local ecology, they're not going to have an economy and they're going to starve. So people get together, cooperate, ration out, and actually plan and rationally organise how to look after things. So I could talk more about this, but once you start talking about things like commons and social sharing, what you can say also is we can make goods to last longer, so we can have prosperity without growth. We can modularise goods so that we can easily kind of replace parts. Whereas at the moment, our completely balmy fucking economic system, you know, computer companies will have the next 5 computers, so we throw away each computer, buy another one, so on and so forth. You know, we're on planet fucking madness. But there are ways in which you can actually construct property rights and construct an economy which is efficient, decentralised, ecological. But what this comes down to at the end of the day is not just contending economic ideas. It's not just that we're in a neutral system where we elect politicians and they think of what is best. What we're in is a system of power politics, and there is a drive all over the world to where there's remaining commons to destroy them, to get rid of public services, to commodify, to produce more economic growth and accumulation and so on and so forth. And to me, what the politics is about is opposing that and changing the system. So I have an eccentric habit of fighting elections. And the reason I fight elections, and the reason I would urge all you to fight elections, is to fight elections, push the good stuff, make the change. And I'll give you a couple of examples of where people have kind of done this. I'm not somebody, you might think this is controversial, who would see myself in the tradition of West European Green parties. If you look at the tradition of West European Green parties, frankly, it's failed. But what you've started off with is people on paper with very, very radical politics. They've then joined coalitions of the left, and the politics have been washed out completely. I'm also controversially not somebody who I would see myself in the tradition of British far-left politics, where you quite often have quite sectarian, dogmatic. I'm not condemning all Greens and all on the left, because I am on the Green left. But you've had, kind of politics where you're not fighting elections, you're not making changes, you're not intervening, you're just saying how bad things are, and you're saying why you're against the other small group. So it's being slightly crossed both Greens and the left. But what we have seen in places of the world like Latin America is very imperfectly left governments getting elected, and there's been all sorts of problems and contradictions, and made some kind of changes. And I should probably wrap up fairly soon. But a good example of this is Peru. So people have heard of Venezuela with Chavez, people have heard of Morales in Bolivia. One of my great condemnations of environmentalists is if we want to save the environment and humanity, the Amazon is absolutely key. And yet, how often do environmentalists talk about the on-the-ground politics and fight in the Amazon? And what you have in the Peruvian Amazon is an organisation called ADAZEP. So ADAZEP is a coalition of something like 50 different ethnic indigenous groups. So some of these people 10, 20 years ago were uncontacted tribes, yeah? And they organise, quite often, groups that have been violently antagonistic to each other. And they have organised these 50 ethnic groups, set up a confederation, and when the elite, the comprador elite, supported by, dreadful British politicians like Chris Bryan, Britain's worst politician, when the kind of elite have tried to sell off the Amazon, to oil companies and gas companies and for biofuels, the people in ADAZEP, the indigenous, rose as a mass, used non-violent direct action and stopped the rainforest being seized. For their troubles in 2009, they were massacred at Bagua, which is something which is hardly reported by any of the British press, because the British press is part of the people saying drive the train faster, quicker to the edge and kill us all. Even the fucking liberal press, to be honest. I could go on. So they used non-violent direct action, people were killed, they continue to resist, and they've been involved in politics, and what you have is, admittedly, an imperfect left president in Peru, but a president that, because the indigenous are so strong and so well organised, has had to go to Bagua and actually bring in a new law saying that if there is oil or gas or so on in the Amazon, the indigenous people have to be consulted. I could also talk about working class action, because if we talk about ecology, it's not about consumption. I sometimes think I should stop being a vegetarian. That if you're thinking about your lifestyle, that's a distraction from thinking about politics. And I'm not going to have a go at people for having lifestyle, but the situation is really, really desperate. We're really, really in trouble. And don't think you can change things just by your individual action. All the time think about tactics, strategy, politics, what you do next. And don't, the lifestyle's great, but it can be compensatory instead of liberating. So working class action is also important. I talk about Vestas, where the workers occupied to defend the wind production. And one of the things that really inspired me is in the 70s in America, you had the Green Ban movement, and some people say that the Green Party in Germany got the idea of green from the Green Bans. And you had the Builders Workers Union, difficult area of the economy to organise, but they organised their union and they refused to build buildings that were bad for the environment and that attacked conservation. The reason why low-level nuclear waste dumping at sea was ended in the UK was the National Union of Seamen, who are now part of the RMT, less sexist title, they actually refused to dump the nuclear waste. I was talking to a comrade in Northern Ireland who said one of the key reasons that DDT was stopped was you had agricultural workers in their unions opposing this. So we have to have a politics which is about indigenous people and workers, and we have to have a completely pragmatic politics, because we're in trouble. The very life support systems of this planet are under threat. You know, I don't pose a utopian perfect politics, but we're in a situation where we have to change social systems, economic systems, and we have to do this tactically and pragmatically and get involved. And we also need a pluralist politics. One of the problems the left has had is it's the sort of Leninist idea in the worst sense, and we condemn everything that Lenin did. He was very good for bear conservation, for example. You know, but we've got to have a politics where the left are weak, we've got to make profound changes. I haven't got all the answers, you haven't got all the answers. If there's like a left group who says, we're right about everything, other people are wrong about everything, that is inadequate. So we have to have a politics of engagement, and I would urge you to engage with worker struggles. I would urge you to work for indigenous struggles. I would urge you to stand for elections and win like Jonathan. And this is a battle which is both external and it's something which is also internal to the Green Party. And I would urge you to join Green Left and organise. If we go back to the 1880s, the first Marxist political party, the Social Democratic Federation, was founded, and it included William Morris. And William Morris was a guy who came from a privileged background. He made his money, I think, from, you know, sort of copper shares and stuff from his family. But he could see that industrialised capitalism in Victorian England was destroying the environment. He could see that there was war in Crimea and places like that. And because of that, he became a Marxist. And my politics is irreducibly Marxist. I've been rather disappointed with how the Marxists went in the last century. But Marx talks about opposition to capitalism, common poor property rights, the environment. The slogan of the SDF was educate, agitate, organise. Let's continue with that.
Thank you, Derek. Before we hopefully have a few minutes left at the end for some discussion, I'm very pleased